Okay, so again, welcome. I'm Andreas, and this is the sort of talk on wearables for Android, not just Android Wear, but we will move on to Android Wear, like in the main part of the talk. But first, I think I should probably sort of introduce myself, and again, also. And I'm Andreas then. I'm working mostly with wearables, all kinds of wearables, and doing research in it. And this it's not just Android Wear, it's just something that part of my wearable research and interests. So I work for Malmö University, but it's only one of the organizations that I'm sort of affiliated with. I'm also part of Arduino, One School One, and a couple of more other organizations where we do research together with my colleagues, and mostly in both wearable and Internet of Things. We sort of see wearables and Internet of Things really closely intertwined. So to get you started, I think I'm going to show you some of the old projects that I've done. Not all of them, that would take too much. But some of the old ones that I've done is sort of anything wearable. It's not the kind of project you would buy on the shelf in a store. It's more research oriented projects. I'm sorry, can you hear me in the back? I'm not sure. Yeah, good. Thanks. That's usually the question I always ask first. And some of them were only ever tested once in the lab setting, while others were tested sort of in a more live setting with papers written for them and presented live on conferences, higher finish, while others were really placed in the like live setting out on the street. They're sort of looking weird, right? That's the kind of almost sometimes we can almost see them as borderline porn. Some of these projects. I'm not gonna show you those projects today because we're filming. And others look kind of weird, even so weird that the police might consider us bombers. You know, in Norway, this is taken in Norway. I'm not sure, anybody here ever been to Norway or come from Norway? You're from Norway?
No, I used to work on cable and ship out there.
So. Okay. A good one information I would tell you is, you see the gun, right? It's not something policemen in Norway carry. Normal policemen don't carry weapons, so these are the terrorist police. It's kind of fun. Not at the time, though. It wasn't a fun experience. But anyway, it's part of building wearables and testing them out in the real life setting. And I've also written a couple of books, the Android wearables, actually focusing on Android Wear, something we will be talking about today. It's coming out in January. And I hope, at least, depending on how many more updates Google are going to plan before that, because that's kind of pushing us back. Too many updates. So, on to the content of today, like going into Google's APIs for building wearable applications, wearables. So, before we start, how many of these, a show of hands? Okay, yeah. You were lucky enough to have the watches, right? We couldn't get those in Sweden. When I wrote the book, we had to actually ask LG for a donation. So they gave us a developer edition watch that keeps crashing every now and then. I hope to soon be able of buying a Wear device in Sweden. Should be available soon. And how many have started developing for Android Wear of you? Like tested something? Okay, that's good to know. You might be a little bit bored today. Sorry. So So, like the general mantra or idea Google has for these wearables or Android Wear is that it should be glanceable. I'm sure all of you have seen that, right? It's something they stressed during Google I/O last time this year. And sort of that means that we should design things that are like really empty of information, or compressed information rather, not empty. So big things usually, not long texts or anything like that, and something we're gonna see today as well. So to develop for Android Wear, we need a couple of things, a couple of requirements. This is not you shouldn't bring out your computer because we're not going to be doing this live. This is just for those of you who have never even started looking at Android Wear. You should know that there are a couple of requirements to start developing. And right now it's like Android Studio is not really a requirement, but it's really recommended that you use Android Studio. How many of you use Eclipse still? Good. I hate Eclipse, sorry. So, when you look at Android Wear, or when I look at Android Wear, I see two paths of developing. One is not really Android Wear development, it's adjusting notifications for displaying on Android Wear. And the other one is actually developing the apps using activities native to Android Wear. And so we're going to be exploring a little bit on both sides today. How many of you have seen this one? This is a tutorial of Android Wear. So it's basically, I see it as a good example of how the notification work on Android Wear, where you have this two-dimensional grid showing texts that you scroll up and down, left and right through. And to build this one, you actually build it with pages, a multiple number of notifications that we're going to show today. And you also can add these actions that you saw, like in this one. You can add actions and many notifications to this big grid of information that is Android Wear. And those two things are the ones we're going to be exploring first now. The pages, how to add multiple pages to this notification, and also exploring the activities. Oh, sorry, actions. Activities come later. So to build this kind of notification with multiple pages, you would actually, it's really simple. You just use the notification manager, or rather the notification compat manager, which contains all of these support activities, these support APIs for Android Wear. And you use this wearable extender to add a list of pages to it. So you have the normal notification, which is the first one, and then you add more pages to it using this extender. It basically looks like this. So it's really similar to what you always build in Android. I'm sure all of you have done this before. But all you do is add this extender and add all of the extra pages to it. So any page beyond the first one has to be added to this list of pages and then displayed. And you can, of course, also add actions to this one. So the actions, just like normal actions, you need a pending intent, you need the drawable for the icon. You don't actually need that one, but for where you need it. And you need this title, right? And it's quite basic as well. It would look like this: a normal action, the content intent, like the action, standard action, looks like that, and it looks just like normal code. You don't have to do anything extra. It just adds the wearable action, just like it would. Of course, you need to use the support manager. And to add these extra wearable actions, it's you need the same things. You need the pending intent, you need the text, you need the drawable, right? And you add the action to the using the wearable APIs instead. And then we just add them, just like normal pages. So it's really simple working with notifications in Android Wear. You just have to add, like if you're using the standard notification manager, you need to switch to using the support compat manager and start adding actions using that one instead. That would give the Android the ability to display all of these extra new stuff available in notification manager. So that's basically all I wanted to say about notifications. We're not going to be going into depth about that because it's really, it looks basically just like normal Android. The interesting part is, of course, the applications, developing native applications for Android Wear, which is basically there's some new stuff in Android Wear. Partly it's the activities have changed a little bit. The layout, the way we think about layouts have changed as well because we have more types of screens. We don't have the rectangular only right now anymore. We have the round one as well, right? And we have a couple of new UI components. We're going to show some of them today. You're going to have to buy the book to see all of them. No, sorry. No, we don't have that much time, I think, to go through everything. So we're just going to be glancing part of the information here, part of the APIs. And we're also going to be looking at using animations, the built-in animations for providing feedback in Android Wear applications. And there's more, but we're not going to be looking into that today because that would take too much time. And there's lots of information online as well, so I would definitely recommend you to read about this on developerandroid.com. So let's start with the activities. So we have two different choices here when we develop Android Wear applications. One is the standard activity, like the very standard normal activity used in Android, in combination with a very special kind of layout with a listener. And we have something called the inset activity, which is a new activity in Android Wear that it can detect what kind of screen you have. So it knows which, do you have a round one or a rectangular one? So using the standard activity is looks like this. You have the normal activity, the normal on create. You set the content view, which is a content view that contains something called a ViewStop, a wearable ViewStop. And you attach a listener to this stub, because this stub is a special layout component that can detect what kind of screen do I have on the device. Is it round or is it rectangular? And this listener would then decide for you which layout you should load on top of this. So what you have is three different layouts here. One with the ViewStop, which is the deciding point of going rectangular or going round. And the other one is the two other ones are the special layouts for the round layout and the rectangular one. So you attach the listener and then just when it knows which one to load, you can start attaching your views to this one just like you would normally. So you can't actually, you would always do all of the connections in this listener, not outside because it doesn't know them. Another thing to think about when you're working with Wear, because it has this listener interface, you can't really, some things you need to wait with. You can't use, for example, on resume always the same way because you have to know, sometimes you need to know that the activity is loaded. All of the connections have loaded before you start messing with them. So you have to sort of rethink the life cycle a little bit so you don't do things in the improper way. And using this new one, this new inset activity, changes things completely. No, not completely. The onCreate method still exists, but you don't load the content view inside this onCreate method. You load it inside the special method where you have like unread for content. That's you have the special method called isRound that defines, okay, I've loaded my layout or content, and I now know which kind of layout should I have or load, depending on is it round or not. There's no isRect, just isRound. And when you've done this, you can start attaching your actions to this one or UI. And another cool thing about the inset activity is that it gives the user the ability to close your application. So this is something you don't get in the normal activity, just the inset activity. So if you have an application extending inset activity, you can touch the screen and this close button would appear. And that's something new in inset. I'm not sure if that's always something you want, but in some cases this is definitely something you should consider having, especially if the user should be able of closing or quitting your application if it's taking too much time. Or, for example, in the book we're developing something that maintains the screen open. At some point this user might want to close this application, so using the inset activity gives you this option inherently built in. And the user interface. There's a couple of new things here. You have the way to display texts on Wear is a little bit different compared to how you display text on normal Android. Images are also a little bit different, and because you have the round watch face, right? So you have to adjust how you think about how to display images. And you have timer lists and something called the countdown or providing feedback, as I said, which are built-in animations in Android Wear. Hopefully the emulator today is going to work fine. I'm not sure about that because it's usually kind of slow. Let's cross our fingers for that. So displaying texts on Android Wear, you usually think of them as cards, just like you would in the tutorial. You don't want to display too much text, and you might have in your application, you might have made it context aware in the sense that perhaps you're getting a message from your friend and you're placing a background image of that friend, of that avatar. You don't want to display text right on top of that, so we're going to use something called this card fragment, which consists of the card frame and the card scroll view. So it is possible to add longer text than what I'm showing here, but and then it would be scrollable. And but it's definitely not recommended. You should try to keep this information as small as possible. And the easiest way of adding texts is using this card fragment class. And you build it just like you would in a normal fragment. You have the container, you instantiate the fragment and add or replace the contents of that container. And if you want to add more, like I have the 2D grid that we had in the saw in the tutorial that you get in when starting up your Wear device for the first time, you have to add something we're not going to be looking at today, something called the grid view, which works kind of like the normal grid view of Android. Only this one displays just one item at a time, and you navigate left and right, up and down through this two-dimensional grid. So it's kind of inverting the way of grid view. And working with images, you have the circled image view, which is kind of a nice thing that you will probably use a lot if you're going to be building applications in Android Wear. Not just because it's an image view, but because it has all of these extra functionalities like displaying progress, for example. So you can use this both as a countdown timer and the progress bar like something's happening, you can update this image view. So for example, if you want to send a message to your friend and Aware just tries to send this big message with the image or something, you can display this image and then have the progress bar around it. So right now I'm just displaying the boring image with the like a circle with the standard icon. And the thing to also remember about circled image view is that it's not going to display unless you provide the required attributes. It's not going to complain either. So to display this image, you actually need the background. Otherwise, it's gonna be basically black. Of course, you might want that as well. It's going to be transparent. And the other one thing that you actually really need is the radius. Without the size of this, it's not going to sort of detect the image, at least not in my experience. It doesn't work yet. Detecting the size of the image and adjusting it to that. You have to adjust the image size yourself by adding the radius, as we saw in this. These new attributes. You can of course do this programmatically as well by getting the view and then setting the radius and setting color. So that's the standard image view without any extra stuff. You also have this idea of the progress, as I told you, which requires two new attributes. The border color, like the progress bar color that goes around this circled image view. And you also have the width of this progress bar, this round progress bar. And it would look something like this. Like if you just have the progress bar shown, or border in this case. And if you want to add a progress bar, you would set progress programmatically, and it would display it sort of like that. So that's kind of a nice new feature in Android Wear, I think. On top of this, we also have something very similar called the delayed confirmation view, which is, again, it's a circled image view, so it has all of these required attributes that you have to use, like the color of the background, the size of the radius of the circle. And on top of this, it has this function of animating that you have to do yourself with the circled image view and the async task or some runnable of some kind. And sort of looks something like this. When interacting with this delayed confirmation view, you would attach a listener, a special listener, not a touch listener, or on you clicked. You would attach this special listener, which would then detect if the user pressed this confirmation view, or if the user did not press it. So for example, a use case for this round one, let's see if we can, oh, I don't have an image, sorry. Looks just like the circled image view. A use case for this is when you want to send something. You have a task on your Android Wear. For example, you had spoken to your Android Wear and you want the start an activity. So you always want to give the user an option of not starting this, because he might have misspoken, or Android Wear might have misunderstood what you said. So you want to provide a way of a grace time, let's say, for about 3 seconds or 4 seconds to let the user cancel your task before you complete it. And that's the optimal use case for this kind of listener, this delayed confirmation view, to say, okay, when the user presses this, we don't want to send it. Or when the countdown has finished, we want to send or complete this task because we know the user understands that it's the correct task to finish. So right now I'm just logging something out. And to actually start this one, you would just like get the confirmation view, set the timer, like how much grace time do you want to give the user, and then start it basically. And that's all you have to do when you want to do this kind of delayed confirmation. And also there is this lists there's new lists in Android. We both have the standard ListView, and then we're kind of adjusted to where. And we have the grid view, like the two-dimensional grid. We're not going to be looking at today. And the cool thing about this new where thing, this where list view, is the items in it. Every single row, it's magnetic. So just like when you scroll it, you would find the closest one when you stop scrolling and make sure that's centered on the screen. So I'm not sure how many of you have ever interacted with the Android. A couple of you. So those of you who haven't, you're welcome to come up and try my sort of crashing LG watch later on after the talk. But the magnetic thing is kind of cool, I think. Gives you an option of like using the list view in a different manner. I use it as menu, for example, in the book. And to build it, just add this new element. This is probably going to change when where goes, I don't know, 4.0 or something like that. We're not going to have it in the support package anymore. But for now, it's in the support package. And just like normal, you would either use the normal activity, attach to it the list, and then add the adapters, just like you would in a normal list. The cool thing about the Wearable, these new lists in Wearable, is that they have this new adapter which handles your view holder pattern automatically, so you don't have to think about that anymore. You don't have to create this extra class all the time. I think that's really cool that they finally put that in. And the item looks just like normal. Style whatever item you want. And just add it, just like normally. So the list view is really everything new handles in the background, so you don't have to think about that. Just add your content. And it looks, in the book we have this, I did this application for running and calculating your calories burned, and we're using a lot of averages, so it depends a lot on which kind of gender you have. So that this is from the book then, that project. And when you scroll this one, the correct thing would select the nearest one to the center and center that one automatically. So another cool thing in Android Wear is providing positive feedback, as they say. It's not just positive, it's negative as well, but the general idea is that you need to provide some sort of feedback on everything you do. Because it's really glanceable, and if you do something, you want it to show. We have 3 different kinds. We have the success, we have open on phone. If you open something, your activity on the phone, you want to show the user that you do that. Or you have a failure animation that will show you that, or show the user that whatever you tried to do failed. And to do that, you need to work with something called a confirmation activity, which is a new kind of activity in Android Wear, but you shouldn't think of it as the same way as the standard activity or the Incest activity I mentioned earlier, because the confirmation activity is really just a layer on top of your application. You don't actually do any layout in there. You just provide this activity, and it will know which animation to show and then disappear automatically. And to show it, basically looks like this. You create an intent, launch this activity, and then the animation will pop up on top. And when it's done, it's going to disappear. So you're back to your standard activity again. I'm gonna try and show this later on when the talk is over, and hopefully the emulator will work nicely. And we have the other one, open on phone, which is again an animation looking something like this. And you can provide this text, whichever text you want to provide, doesn't matter. or you can provide an empty text. The animation won't change. And the sad face, failure. We failed to do something, and this one needs to be interacted to be removed. The other two don't need to be interacted with by the user. They pop up and disappear automatically, and this one needs to be swiped to be removed by the user, so the user knows that, okay, this action that the watch tried to take didn't really succeed. And finally, before we finish, I wanted to mention this really cool new thing about sending data between the devices, because that's sort of my core interests in ways of sending data. And in Android Wear, you have a couple of new ways of doing this using the Google APIs, the Google services. The first one is data item. It's basically a shared storage between the wearable device and the watch. So if you create this one, you can think of it as a shared Dropbox internally between your applications, where you store all data and will be automatically synced between them. And you also have this idea of the message API, which is a fire and forget kind of API. You send a message and you don't really care if it was received by the other end. And this is bi-directional. You can send messages from the phone to the wearable and from the wearable to the phone. It works both ways. And you also have these wearable listener services that listen for data layer events. So if something has happened on the data item. The first one is for the background services, and the second one, this data listener, is for when your application is in the foreground. So if you want to listen for changes while your application is in the foreground, you would use number 5, data listener. So we're not going to be looking at all of these because that would take too much time, I think. We're just going to be looking at the wearable or the message API and how to send messages from the phone to the, or from the wearable wear device to the phone, and then to send backwards or the other way around, you would just switch the things around. It's the same API. Looks exactly the same. And to do this, we need, on the wear end, we need the Google API. We need this connection callback, and we need a node. So the Google API will be the client that we're connecting with, and the node will be the phone we're connecting towards, like our mobile phone. And it's quite easy, actually. You would just use this Google API builder, creating a new instance, defining which kind of API do you want to connect with. Remember, this Google API client is not just for wearable APIs, it's for other kinds of APIs as well. So we can use it for wearable and for other stuff. So we're adding the API, and we're setting the connection callback. So adding this connection callback, we know that, okay, we've successfully connected. So we can start getting this reference to which client we've connected to, which looks something like this. We have the connection callback interface, and we have two options, like on connected, when we've successfully connected, and when we've disconnected. So we should remove any kind of connections or instances we've got running here, or provide feedback to the user, of course, that the connection was closed. And adding the connection, this is all running asynchronously, so you need a thread to do this. It's actually the await method here, this method that forces us to push this to a thread for runnable. So we're getting the connection, or this connection result, it's called, by going to the node API, getting the correct node and trying to do a connect, launching this await method. And if we successfully did this, we should get a list of at least one node inside, usually just one. right? Can't connect Wear to multiple devices yet. And we would simply get this node, and we could use this node later on to send data and read data, of course. So sending messages, we're using the same API, the Google API, and saying send to this node in this message path, send this message in bytes. And then we just call await again and await the result. So we can also read the result of this send message, if it was failed or not, but we're not doing it here. And I'm not sure how many of you have been toying around with the kind of pub sub services. But the idea here is the path defines what kind of message are we sending from the wearable. So we can send different kinds of messages defined by us in our application. And this one I'm just having one path, XDA. And if I, for example, see if I can come up with a good example quickly. No, sorry. Maybe a chat message client, if you want to change your online settings, you would have talk to your phone. That would send a message to your mobile phone, which would then connect through internet to your chat, online chat server and change your settings. The same thing if you want to send a message from your phone or your Wear device to your phone, you would use another path, perhaps, saying messages instead of settings. So that's the kind of idea behind this path, to be able of setting different levels and different kind of routes on inside your devices. And you would just pass the bytes of the message. And this time, I'm just sending a simple message, a string, and getting the bytes from that. On the mobile end, it looks just almost identical. We need the API client, we need the connection callback, and instead of a node, because the mobile is the node in this case, it's the receiving end, we need a message listener. And we're getting the API in the very same way, identical. And the same thing with the connection callback, it looks almost identical. The big difference here is that we're adding a listener. When we've managed this connection with our Wear device, in this case, we're adding a listener on that connection. And receiving inside this listener, we're looking for new messages. Again, this is also asynchronously, so we need this other thread running. Because it's not something you're running on the UI thread in this case, it's running in the backend in the Google API services. And to, in this case, update our UI with a toast, we need this other thread, right? So I'm just listening and getting, first of all, the data and the path to decide what should this phone do. In this case, I'm just having one single path, but I could, as I said, have multiple paths and change this kind of behavior on the mobile end. And in this case, I'm just displaying this toast. Should look something like this. And basically that's how the this fire and forget message API works. You would simply use the Google API services. It's really simple. Everything in Wear is getting very simple, as you can see. And Google is, sorry, I shouldn't say that even. Google is messing with my plans now. That's the kind words. So they're both giving me headache and giving me joy with these new stuff they're gonna add. Partly because I have to release a book, and on the other end, I want these kind of new stuff. I'm not sure if you've heard the latest news a couple of days ago that they're releasing, giving us the ability to add watch faces. I know some of you might have hacked that already. No? But there are guys out there who have already been able of adding watch faces before Google gave them the opportunity to. And we're also getting Bluetooth connections. I like that, because then I can connect my weird projects to Underwear, finally. And hopefully also more sensors like GPS and that kind of thing, depending on the hardware, of course. But we are getting new stuff in October, I hear. So hopefully it's going to be good news. And that's the 40 minutes I planned for, almost exactly, I see. And yeah, don't applaud yet. We have the wearable or the emulator trying, hopefully that's gonna work. If it doesn't, you can throw something at me.
Is it ironic or appropriate that your presentation was well timed?
Actually, it's kind of ironic because when I lecture at school, say now I'm already extending over time. When I lecture at school, I tend to either be really quick or like go 1 hour overtime, and then my students hate me. So let's start with the animations, like the kind of animations for feedback here. So this first one should be the success animation. So let's see here. Oh, not that one. Yeah, you see, it should be looking nicer than that, right? The animation. It's kind of, the emulator is kind of slow, but it should like zoom in, as you've seen on the videos from Google. And let's see, I have a couple of these. I'm just going to show one more. The delayed confirmation. Let's hope this one works as well.
Would the Intel emulator work faster?
So what?
Would the Intel emulator work faster, or is there only an ARM emulator?
Oh, might. I'm not using that. I'm usually, oh, there it is. So you get, this is the delayed confirmation. It's not the progress bar, but they look basically the same. So when you press on that one, it would fire this, as you can see down here, would fire this finished, do something, because it's finished, or if I press it, should fire something else, but it didn't. Or I might have to press twice. Yeah, do something else. So yeah, now you're welcome to applaud. Questions?
Outside the wearable, but just a bit surprising when you were talking about the Incest activity.
Yeah.
You were using a method called xround. It's just it's not very future-proof, is it? Can't you just use something like what's usually in Android, like resources, layout, underscore round or underscore square? I guess my point is if later I want to design a watch screen being a triangle, for instance, would I need to use a new method called xtriangle?
I'm not sure. This is the APIs Google has given us. It's not my method that is round. It is Google that has given us this method. It's round.
It means it can't work with as it worked for Android phones. It can't work with a layout underscore round. There's nothing like this. You know the folder inside resources.
I'm not sure if I hear you correctly.
You know for Android devices, you can define the folders.
Yeah, of course.
Layout
yeah.
And API or whatever. So can't you just do layout underscore round or layout underscore square?
Yeah, you should. I hope they're going to give us that, like automatically giving us the correct layout. But right now, this is the way to go. Like either the inset or the ViewStop. I think you were first.
The most interesting part of Android Wear would be voice actions. How they work.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't bring that on. Yeah.
A speech text.
Yeah.
How can I?
Yeah, that's another topic that I didn't really bring in the book because I assumed it would be like it's the first thing you always look at when with Android Wear, so I didn't want to bring that in as well. But of course, there are ways of doing that. So I'm not gonna speak long about that because time. Yeah.
You touched on your research and just wondered what research you're hoping to, what you're hoping to support to Android Wear, and what kind of things you've been doing that have made the police come and point guns at you.
Right now I haven't ported anything of that to Android Wear because we haven't been able to, well, first of all, we don't have the devices.
Yeah.
I had wrote half the book before I had even touched an Android Wear device, a real device. Only working on Android Wear emulator. But with the new Bluetooth connectivity options, I really hope that we're going to be able to connect our new stuff, our ongoing research projects that we haven't shown here to doing more things, not just this watch thing, but being able of connecting all of your wearable stuff to that one, and maybe eventually to your phone through that one. Because right now we've always been developing our projects saying that, okay, we have this idea of Internet of Things, and this, or the phone, is the thing that we always carry with us, and it has all of these sensors, all of these connectivity options. We always see that as our personal router in our pocket. So whatever we develop, we connect to that one, and we have this full world of possibilities through the phone. And hopefully, Android will give more of this.
I've just got one very quick question, and not more in depth. But with the card view, card fragments, they've got an additional scroll view that's included with that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's only got text. Is it possible to add anything else to that, such as a layout or like perhaps images inside there?
I mean, you can, of course, design your own, like extending, like you would normally extend your views. With you have the ability of taking the card view and the card scroll view and building your own site.
The other one's a bit more in depth is within activities such as the insert activity or a standard activity using the watch ViewStop. How can they be responsive to the intent system that's native to Android, such as if you was providing a notification to an Android Wear device, would you be able to give it a navigatable or a notification action that would open a Wear application? So if you had a notification that had an action and you tap the action, would it open the APK? Could you do that?
Definitely.
Yeah. And is that using like a standard?
Yeah, the standard stuff. Create an intent for that action, and then of course.
Is it also like vice versa? So from the device, from
like a notification on the mobile, do something on the. I think it should be. I haven't tested myself actually.
There are apps that do that already.
Yes.
One of the things they've been doing with Pebble, I haven't done much Android Wear, is to very easily consume sort of REST-based APIs from the Pebble SDK and actually putting something on the Pebble phone and Pebble Watch itself without actually building an Android app or any app for the phone. And you can get Ruby and Node.js to expose APIs relatively quickly. How quick is it to do with a Wear device? And do I need to build an application on my phone or service layer to actually consume that? Can I do it straight onto a Wear device like I can with Pebble?
Well, I mean, you can build the Wear applications straight on your Wear device. That is the thing you're doing with the activities here. The second part. But to release it publicly through Google Play, you need this extra application like this.
The thing is, the APK that you want to distribute on your Wear is always should be packaged inside the application for your phone.
Sure.
Always.
So this might actually may have answered the question actually, which is how do you install an application on the red device? Do you have like a USB stick? Like into USB?
You mean like from Google Play?
Yeah. No, I mean, say you're developing something in the SDK.
Oh.
And then you decide.
You have an emulator.
You don't want to test doing emulator.
Yeah, you connect it via USB, just like you would otherwise. And of course, you get the normal, like does this computer allowed to develop for this device, like the screen? You don't get that on the device, you get it on this one. Like otherwise, it's identical. So you need the Wear, of course, you need the Wear development APK, the application installed on your phone. But that connected to your Wear device.
Okay.
So you need that connection for that.
Okay. Needs to be forwarded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, it will be a forward. Do you have a question?
How does Android Wear compare to, because there's a lot of wearable stuff going on there, it's the big buzz thing, but Android Wear is just one of them. There's Pebbles and then there's Apple's got theirs and stuff. Like in your professional opinion, like how well does Android Wear sit amongst the rest of them? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it flaws? Is it
I think
catching
it's
up?
too early to say, but in one way I think it's nicer APIs. Because I've seen some of these, I'm not going to mention any names here because sponsors and all. But I've seen some of these APIs, and then they seem more complicated. Like there's more stuff happening, like in the front end. And for me as a teacher and a researcher, I want my students to be able to do things quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you've made it look very simple. Like it looks like it's just a small extension to an Android application.
Yeah, it really is. Like it looks normal.
Yeah.
And some of these new methods, of course, but they are really simple once you understand this interfaces.
Yeah,
sorry.
another one. I've developed for Pebble, and with Pebble SDK, you can receive an ACK or an ACK when you send a string or whatever. But you said that with Android Wear, you send and forget. You fire and forget.
No, that's one of the APIs. You also have this data item that is synced between the two devices. So the message API that I showed is just one of them. And that is the fire and forget. And then you have the other ones that is more or less shared storage, or will always be updated.
Because from a developer point, it's interesting to know I have received or not information that they sent.
Yeah, definitely.
It's possible.
Yeah, it is possible.
What would you say is the like the most complex or most like the best I'm not sure tutorial or examples that you can provide in your book that you're announcing? What would you say is the best features that you go into?
Of course, we're trying to cover the entire thing in a very simple way with the examples like this one. Some of these were actually from the book. And
is there any like personal standout ones from the book that you think of? Yeah, what's your favourite kind of thing?
My favourite? It's difficult to say. I think for me, because I'm not the only writer, but for the chapters that I wrote, is the UI stuff. All of these new image views and progress bars and the information views and all of that stuff. Like getting to know that. And I was really happy with the adapter, of course. Chapters, I think that's chapters 5 and 4. And then we have the stuff that we didn't mention, is the like the voice interactions on chapter 6, no, 7. Now I'm not gonna recite what chapter numbers, but we're trying to cover all of it, and I hope every developer can find some use at least. And at the end we have 3 projects that goes a little bit more in depth and collecting more stuff from all of the other chapters, and hopefully it's gonna be good.
All right, let's give Andreas a round of applause.